Alright then, so we said earlier that Vue can be used in two different ways, right? Either to create and control a whole website to create a single page application, or to create standalone widgets which control certain parts of a web page. Now to begin with, we'll just create a standalone widget using Vue and we'll drop it into our HTML page which we have over here. Because that way requires minimal setup. All we need to do is link to the Vue.js library from our HTML file, and then we can jump right into learning Vue without getting bogged down by setting up a whole Vue website. But once we've learnt the basics, we'll move on to creating those fully fledged Vue applications using the Vue command line tools. So first off, head to the Vue documentation to grab the CDN link for the Vue library. And by the way, the Vue docs are really good. They're very in-depth and they give you a lot of examples of how to use the different features. So definitely have that as your sidekick to this course. And I'll leave a link to the Vue 3 docs attached to this lesson. Anyway, the first thing I want to do is go to Getting Started over here and then click on Installation. Now, once you've done that, you can scroll down here, and this is the type of installation we're going to be using for now. We're just going to use the CDN. So we need to grab this thing right here. And by the way, you see this where it says @next. That is the version, and it means if you say @next, you're always going to get the latest release. Now, I'm not actually going to use @next. I'm going to use a specific version, which is, let me just paste this in first of all, inside the head, and I'm going to use 3.0.2 because this is the release at the time of recording this video. So if you want everything to behave exactly the same way, you should use the same release, okay? So anyway, now we have that, we can use Vue in this web page. Now, if we wanted to, we could write some JavaScript code at the bottom of our body in a script tag directly inside this HTML file to implement that Vue functionality. But what I'm going to do instead is create a separate file, and I'm going to call that app.js to create our Vue code in, just so we can keep it separate and the HTML file doesn't get messy. So I'm going to do a script and I'm going to link to this. So source is equal to app.js, like so. Oops, that should be in double quotes. And then if we save it and go to app.js, I'm going to do a single console.log statement just to say hello Vue to make sure this is linked up correctly. And by the way, also you'll notice me during this course not use semicolons. Now that is deliberate because Vue in itself doesn't use semicolons, so I'm just going along with that preference. You can use them if you wish. Alright, so I'm going to save that and I'm going to go over to where we have this in the browser. And remember, to view this in a local dev server, you just install the live server package, go to the HTML file and then right click and go to open with live server. That opens it up in the browser over here. So now I'm just going to open up the console by pressing F12 and we can see right here, hello Vue. Alright, so that is our console log, so everything is working. And we also see this message which shows us that we are using this version right here of Vue. So now we have all of this set up, we're going to go ahead and create a Vue app inside this JavaScript file. Okay then, so now we've loaded in the Vue library right here and we're linking to our own app.js file, and this is where we're going to write all of our Vue code. But how exactly do we do that? Well, we start off by creating what's known as a Vue app, and it's the job of that Vue app to control either the full website or just a certain part of a web page. Now in our case, it's going to control just a certain part of the web page. But first of all, how do we create this Vue app? Well, when we loaded in this Vue library, we get access to a Vue object, and on that Vue object there is a method called createApp, and that's what we use to create a Vue app. I'm going to store the result of this in a constant called app, but you can call this constant what you want, and I'm going to set it equal to Vue, which we get access to because we load in the Vue library, and then use the method createApp, and this creates a Vue app for us. So now we have that, but how do we tell this app right here that we want it to control a certain part of the web page? Well, on this app now we get access to a method called mount, and that method tells the app at what point or where in the DOM to mount this application. So I could say app.mount, for example, and pass in some kind of selector like hash app. And that would tell Vue to take our app instance that we have right here and mount it in the DOM where we have some kind of element with the ID of app. Now for this to work, we need an element with the ID of app. So let's create that. I'm going to say div and then hash app, press tab to create this. And now we have a div with the ID of app. So over here, we're saying create the app and then mount that to this element in the DOM, and then now our Vue app controls anything inside this div. Anything outside of it, it doesn't control, so not here for example, but anything inside the div, it would control. I hope that makes sense. So this is the part of the web page now that we're controlling with Vue. But what does this mean? Well, it means that any kind of dynamic data that we want to output inside this app element, or any events or interactivity which occur inside it, like click events or mouse move events, all of that will now be controlled by our Vue app. For example, if the user clicked on something inside this element, inside here, like a button or something else, then we could react to that inside our Vue app. We could set up a function to handle that click event. Or if we have some data, like a list of book titles, we could use our Vue app to make that data accessible inside this element so we could output it to the browser. Now, the way we do all this is by first passing in an object into the create app method. Now, this object represents something called a root component in Vue. It's basically the component that will be controlling the app section, this section right here, of the web page. And inside it, we can set up any data or functions to react to events that we want. Another thing that we can specify inside this is the component template. That is the template that will be rendered inside the app element. So the way we do that is by coming up inside this object and creating a template property, which will be a string. And this string is just going to be some HTML. So for example, an H2, I am the template, close off the H2, and that's it. That is our template now for this component. And what we're saying here is that we want inside this app, inside this div right here, this to be the template that's output. So now Vue is going to mount the DOM at this location. It's going to take our template and inject that into this element inside it. So if we preview now in the browser, we can see I am the template, and I'm going to inspect that to see the HTML, and you'll notice this is the template that we created inside the component. All right, so it's just output inside this div right here with the ID of app. And also notice we have this extra attribute called data-v-app. That just denotes that this is the Vue app. This is where it's mounting the DOM. Okay, cool. Now, sometimes if you have a more complex template with several lines of HTML, it's not always appropriate to create that template right here because this could get very messy. So instead what we could do, and what I'm going to do going forward, is just create the template directly inside the app right here. So for example, I could say H2 and then tab and say I am the template now and save it. And now this will be the template of this component right here. Now, it looks as though we're just making normal HTML, and we are, but what we can do inside this template is actually output dynamic data. And if I save it now, first of all, we'll see that template, but later on, if I try to output something dynamic that we define over here as some data inside our component, we can. So that's what makes it different than normal HTML, and we couldn't do that if we didn't use Vue. Alright then, so now we have our Vue app and root component right here, and we're mounting that to the DOM at this position, the div with an ID of app. So now it controls this section, right? Now remember, the whole idea of using Vue is to make our website or widgets in the website more interactive and dynamic. And one part of that is to be able to output dynamic variables or data. So say for example, I wanted to output inside this app element a book title. I could do that right here by creating a paragraph tag and then just typing or hard coding the book title. So the Final Empire, for example, is a book title. And yeah, if I save this, I'm going to see it on the screen. Now imagine that this value might change over time or in reaction to user events. we might have a button that a user clicks and that cycles through some different values of book titles. So we see different values right here. Now, to implement that functionality, when we're hard coding a value, would be quite hard to constantly change this. So instead, what I'd like to do is output some kind of variable here instead, a title variable. Now, we can do that in Vue. The way we do it is by creating a data function inside our component. So I could say data, like so, and this, by the way, is shorthand for a function inside an object. We say the function name, parentheses, and then curly braces. And inside that function, I can return a data object. So this is important. We must create a function and then return an object inside that function. And the properties we make inside this object are then accessible from our template. So I could create a title property, and that would be the final empire. And then over in the template, that title property would be accessible as a variable. So instead of hard coding it right here, I could do double curly braces to output a variable and then the property name, and this property name matches whatever we called it right here, and then close the double curly braces. So this is how we output a variable or dynamic value inside our template. Double curly braces, the name of the property we want to output, and then close the curly braces. And now if I save this and preview, we don't see double curly braces title, we see the value of that data property, right? And like I said, the benefit of this is that if this value over time changes or changes in reaction to the user doing something, then it's going to update over here because now it's not hard coded. This is a dynamic changeable value. Now we can define as many different properties inside this object as we like. So I'm going to say author, and that will be not the Brandon Sanderson, like so, and also maybe an age property, and I'm going to say 45. I don't know whether that is his age, I've just guessed that, but if I save this now, we can then output those variables inside this template. So let me do that. I'm going to say author first of all, and then I'll do another one which is the age, and now we should be able to see all of those in the browser, and we do, Brandon Sanderson and 45. Now, it doesn't matter what data type you use inside this object. We can use numbers, we can use strings, we can use objects, arrays, booleans, etc. It really doesn't matter. The only limitation we have really is that we can't use those variables outside of the scope of the Vue app, and that is outside of this element right here, because this is where we're mounting the Vue app. So if I try to access a variable outside of that, like the title, this is not going to work. It just outputs title like this because Vue is not controlling this part of the web page, okay? Only the stuff inside this element. Now, if we try to access a variable that doesn't exist, for example, if I change this to titles, then it's not going to find that and it's not going to output anything. It will just be left blank. So let's change that back to title and save it. And now we see everything again. So next up, I'm going to show you how we can update these values in reaction to click events. So a lot of the time when you create a website, you want to be able to react to certain things that happen in the browser. For example, click events. So a user might click on a button and you might want to fire some code when that happens. In my case, I want to fire some code that might do something like increase the value of age or change the value of one of these properties. So to do this kind of thing, to react to events in Vue is really, really simple. The way we do this is by first of all creating a button or any other kind of element. It doesn't have to be a button, and using a directive called v-on. So this is what's known as a directive, and there's many different directives in Vue that do different things. This one right here is to allow us to react to different types of events. Now the V is for Vue, and pretty much every directive starts with that, and then the name of the directive is on, meaning on click or on mouse move or something else. So how do we say what type of event that we want to react to? Well, we use a colon and then click to say we want to react to a click event. So we use the directive v_on, then a colon, then the type of event. Now, like I say, there are more types of events and we'll see those later on, but for now, let's set this equal to something. And this right here inside double quotes is where we can write some JavaScript code. And that JavaScript code will run whenever a user clicks on this button. So what do I want to do when a user clicks on this button? Well, I want to increase the age property right here that we have by 1. So when I click on this, I want some code to run to take this value and up it by 1. Now I can increase that age from the template itself right here because we have access to the age property, or from inside the components. I'm going to show you how to do both, but to begin with, let's do it from inside the template. So I can just take the age property and I don't have to wrap it in curly braces because this is not being output. It's not actually part of the template that gets rendered to the DOM. Inside here, we're just using JavaScript, and the property right here is age, so we don't need curly braces inside directives when we use the different properties, only when we're outputting them to the browser. So we take that and we can just say plus plus to add 1 to this value. That's how we add 1 to a value in JavaScript, right? So now when I click this, hopefully the age will go up, and it does. Awesome. So I'm going to duplicate this and do one for decreasing the age as well. So decrease age, and then instead of plus plus, it's going to be minus minus. So again, we say v_on and then colon, the type of event, which is a click event, and then the code we want to run, which is decreasing the age by 1. Save it, and this goes up and this goes down. Awesome. They work. So I said that we can react to click events on other types of elements. It doesn't have to be a button. So I could attach one to a div, and I could say right here, v-on, and then click is equal to something. Now, before I go on, I want to show you a shortcut for v-on right here. Because we react to events so much, the Vue team made a shortcut for it, and that is to replace all of this, v_on and the colon, with an @ symbol. And that means the same thing. It means react to some kind of event. And this event can be whatever event you want. It can be a click event or some other kind of event that we will see later on. And again, we can write some JavaScript code in here. So I could say the title is now equal to a different string. So I'm going to use single quotes here, and I'll just say something else and try to spell this correctly and then save it. So if I now refresh, I don't see that. That's because we have nothing inside the div. So we'll say right here, change book title and save it. And if we click on this now, you can see it changes it to something else. Now, I said before that we could also update these properties right here inside the components. So let's do that instead. I'm going to delete this and I'm going to go back to the components and I'm going to create a component method. Now, the way I do that is by adding on another property inside this component. Now, it can be above the data function or below it. I'm going to do it below, and it's going to be a methods property. And then any functions or methods that we want to run for this component, we place inside here. So I want to create a method called change title, like so. And again, I'm using the function shorthand. And inside here, what do I want to do? Well, I want to update the value of this. So whenever this function is called, I want to update this. But first of all, how do we actually call this function? Because that's what we want to do when we click on this button right here, or this div. Well, like we have access to the different data properties, we also have access to the different methods from the template. So I could say right here, change title, and now whenever we click on this, it's going to invoke this function right here. Now inside here, I want to update the title, but first of all, let's just console.log you clicked me so we can see this in action. So if I now open up the console and click on this, you can see you clicked me. So this is working. Whenever we now click on this div, because we reference this function and we don't need to invoke it, we just reference it right there. Whenever we click on that, it then invokes the function. So now let's update the title value. Now I can't just say title is equal to something else, and we'll change it to words of radiance. And if I try this out, you'll see it just doesn't work. So we don't get access to title just on its own. We have to say this.title. Now this references the component itself, and then Vue proxies all of these different properties up onto the component instance, so they're accessible from the component. So I can say this.title or this.author or this.age inside our methods to access those, and then I can update them as well. So now this will work, and if I save it and try this over here, change the book title, we can see now it updates to Word of Radiance. Awesome. Now, one more thing, you can also pass in two functions when we call them arguments. So say I want to pass in a book title here and then update the value of the title to whatever value I pass into the function. Right? So let me do that. Let me do single quotes and say the book title is going to be Oathbringer. So I'm passing a string into this function. Now, if I save it and come over here, I can accept that into the function right here. And I can say instead of this.title is equal to Words of Radiance, instead this.title is equal to title, which is the thing I take in. And that can be called whatever you want. You can call it ABC if you want and update it to ABC. But to me, it makes sense to call it title. Save it. And let's see if this works. Change the book title. And this time it changes to Oathbringer, which is the argument we passed in to the function. Now, it might be that later we let a user type in the new book name, and then we can pass that new book name in as an argument instead of hard coding it right here. But that's in the future when we learn about forms and input fields. But just know that that possibility is there. But next up, we're going to look at conditional rendering based on our data and certain conditions. Sometimes we only want to show content dependent on certain conditions, right? So, for example, if a user is logged in, we might show an account button in the navbar somewhere. If not, we might show a login link instead. Another example would be the hiding and showing of a mobile menu. If a certain condition is true, then we show the menu. If not, then we hide it. So these are both examples of conditional rendering, really useful in lots of different cases. And in Vue, it's very, very simple to do. All we need to do is use a Vue directive called v-if. So say, for example, I want to conditionally show the books on the screen. What I could do is come over here and cut this. I'm going to create a div and I'm going to nest that inside the div. Then I'm going to apply a v-if directive to this div, and we set that equal to something. So Vue is going to look at this and it's going to evaluate whatever is inside the double quotes. If that evaluates as true, then we're going to show this. If it evaluates as false, then we won't show this. So let's set it equal to false first of all, save it, we don't see it. If I change this to true, then we do see it. So that's how we conditionally show something, by evaluating something inside a v-if directive. Now, obviously, we don't just want to pass true or false in here because that would be pointless. Instead, what I want to do is pass in maybe a dynamic value. So I'm going to come to the components and you'll see that I stripped out the previous method we had. And what I'm going to do is create a new property. So I'll do that at the top, and this is called show books. And to begin with, I'll set it to be true. Now, what I want to do is say in here, evaluate show books. So it's going to look at that property that we have and evaluate it. If it's true, it's going to show this. If it's false, it won't. So to begin with, we should see it. If I change this to false over here, then we shouldn't see it. Okay? So that's us conditionally showing the books on the screen. But what if I want to give the user the ability to toggle this value right here? So say, for instance, they click on a button. Once they click it, it toggles this from true to false. If they click it again, it toggles it from false back to true. Well, let's try that. I'm going to come down here and create a button. And inside this button, I'm going to do a span tag. And inside the span, I'm going to say hide books, like so. The reason I'm creating a span tag is because we're going to also have another span tag down here later, which says show books, and conditionally show one of these two. So let's just keep it at hide books for now, but also attach a click event using the @ symbol to the button. And in here, I want to reference a function, which I'm going to call toggle show books. So now I need to create that function over here inside the methods property. So toggle show books, that's a function. And then inside here, I need to say this.show books is equal to false, for example, right? So if I save this now, what's going to happen is when we click on this, it's going to fire the toggle show books and it's going to set that property to false. And then hopefully, because that's false, this will evaluate to false and it won't show this. Hope that makes sense. So hide books, and now we don't see them. But if I click on this again, then we don't get those books back. So instead of setting this to false, what I'm going to do is set it to the opposite of whatever show books currently is. And that way we're just toggling it on and off. So to do that, I can say this.show books, like so, and that would set it equal to what it currently is. But then we can say set it to whatever it currently isn't, reverse it by using the exclamation in front of it. And now if this is true, it's going to reverse that because of this and turn it to false. If this is false, it's going to reverse that because of the exclamation and turn it into true. So now we're just toggling it from true to false and back and forth. If I save this, hide books, it goes, click it again, it appears, etc. Awesome. So as well as this, it makes no sense to have this text saying hide books when the second time around it actually shows them. So I want to toggle what we show here as well. So let me come down here and I'm going to say I want to show this if the value of show books is currently true, because then we want to hide them. So I'll say v-if is equal to show books. So if the books are currently showing, then we'll see this message right here. Now I'm going to create another one of these that says show books, but I only want this to show, this to appear if this is false. So I'm going to put a little exclamation mark in front of that to say only show this if it's false. Alternatively, you could say if show books is equal to false, like so. But I'm just going to use the exclamation mark, and now if show books is false, then this statement is true. So let me save it and preview. Hide books, show books, hide books, show books. So now we're conditionally showing the books, but also conditionally showing a different message inside the button dependent on the value of show books as well. If it's true, we show this message. If it's false, then we show this message. Now, another way of doing this is instead of v-if twice, we can use a v-else. So after a v-if, we can use an else clause, much like you can in JavaScript. So I could say v-else right here, and then inside here say show books. And we don't have to set this equal to anything. All we're saying is, look, if show books is true, show this element, else show this one, right? So we can directly place this after a v-if. So if I save this now, it's going to do exactly the same thing. Hide books, show books, all right? So that's pretty cool. Now, there's one other directive I want to show you, which allows us to conditionally show things on a screen, and that is vShow. And it does something very similar to show books. So I'm going to create a div right here that says currently showing books, right? Now, I'm going to use a directive this time called vShow. So not vIf, vShow. And again, it evaluates this, and if it's true, it shows. If it's false, it doesn't show. So I can pass in show books here. If that property is true, it's going to show this. If it's false, it's not going to. So if I save it, you can see currently showing books. If I toggle that value, it doesn't show now. Then it shows, then it doesn't. So this does what appears to be the same thing. But there is one subtle difference. When we use vIf, this actually takes it out of the DOM completely when this is false, and then inserts it when it's true. When we use vShow, it just uses CSS instead. So it says display block when it's true, and then display none when it's not true. So there is a difference in how Vue achieves this. So I can demo this by coming over here and inspecting this element, and look at this one right here. So you can see it has a style tag attached to it. If we click on hide books, then we see style display none, but the div is still actually there in the HTML. If we click it again, you can see that display none is taken away. Now, if we take a look at this by inspecting, then we hide the books. It actually removes it from the DOM completely. And then when we click this again, it injects it into the DOM as well. Now, generally speaking, adding and removing something from the DOM is more time consuming and expensive in terms of performance than hiding and showing using CSS. So if you had an element that could be hidden and shown a lot over and over, like drop-down content or links in a nav, I would probably use vShow. But if it's something that won't change very often, like if a user is currently logged in, then I would use viv. But it's entirely up to you which one you use. Next up, we're going to dive back into events like the click event, but this time we're going to look at other mouse events as well.